Victor, an 11-year-old boy with curious brown eyes, lived in Sunnyville, a town surrounded by vast fields and warm sunshine. When Victor was just 7, his younger sister Emma passed away from cancer, leaving a gaping hole in their lives. He remembered her bright smile and giggles, but the pain of her loss still lingered. The loss was devastating, especially for Victor's father, who became withdrawn and grumpy over time. He started drinking heavily, and his eyes, once bright and cheerful, now seemed dull and lifeless. He barely spoke to his wife, Rebecca, or Victor, and the silence was deafening. Rebecca, a fruit trader with a warm smile, worked hard to keep the family afloat. She sold fruits by the roadside, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in their home, which had once been full of joy and laughter, but was now a void, unhappy place. The smell of fresh fruits and the sound of Rebecca's laughter were the only remnants of their happy past. Victor struggled to understand the permanence of death, but he felt the pain deeply. He was already forgetting Emma's face, as his father had hidden all her pictures and belongings away. His father's grief had also cost him his job at the finance firm, leading to more tension at home. Arguments between Rebecca and Victor's father were frequent, often ending in tears and hugs. One night, during a particularly heated argument, they heard a strange whispering sound coming from Victor's room. It was 3 a.m. and the power was out due to unpaid bills. The darkness seemed to amplify the tension. When they checked on Victor, they found him shivering on his bed, his body scorching hot. Rebecca quickly gave him a lukewarm bath, kept him hydrated, and made him ginger tea. Victor's face was weak, but he finished the tea, his eyes fixed on his mother's worried face. Then she put him back to sleep. But this was when everything became crazy, because as Victor closed his eyes, he felt like he was falling, and then he hit the ground hard. It was painful. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a scorching desert, the sun beating down on him relentlessly. He was actually dreaming, but he had no idea. So back in his dream, Victor looked around the desert, still not fully conscious. The scorching sun beat down on him relentlessly. But when he noticed the familiar sweater he was wearing, he smiled, recognizing it. That was when he became fully conscious, wondering, where the hell have I been? He ran a few meters, touched a part of the tall cactus plant, and in less than 5 seconds, an eagle came flying. Its wings spread wide and picked him up. As they soared through the sky, Victor felt an exhilarating rush, the wind whipping his hair into a frenzy. All those times he would wake up, knowing he had dreamt, but unable to recall a single detail. Well, that was because he was here, in this strangely familiar world. And just like how he couldn't remember his dreams while in the real world, when he was here, he couldn't recall his original life on Earth, the sad one where his sister had died, and his father was a stranger to him. After flying for a while, Victor's eye caught a dark figure in a black cloak, walking on the far ground below him, and he wondered what it was. Deep within his consciousness, he knew that the only things that existed in this world were those he allowed to exist. But he wasn't fully conscious of this, so he didn't think too much about it, as they were already approaching the town. The eagle dropped him at his doorstep, and he quickly ran inside, eager to see his family. The first person he saw was Emma, and as he saw her, he smiled happily, and he hugged her very tightly. Victor didn't know why, but he felt like he hadn't seen her in ages. Emma was kind of surprised at this, but she hugged him back just as tightly. Victor was just arriving at dinner time, and as he sat at the dinner table, his mum looked at him and said, "I knew you wouldn't remember to bring the cactus I sent you to bring." He quickly remembered that she had earlier sent him to get cactus plants for her traditional cactus tea. He apologized, and she giggled. Then their father, Michael, walked in, and Rebecca and the kids welcomed him happily. They had a family dinner night, a perfect one, filled with laughter and love. Victor was so happy, feeling like he hadn't experienced such joy in a long time, but things were about to take a turn. Later on at sundown, Victor and his sister went to their backyard, picked some unripe lemons, and played their invented version of bowling. Then Victor involuntarily took a strong bite into the unripe lemon, and the acidic lemon juice hit him hard, traveling fast to the soles of his feet and back to his mouth. He felt the shock twice, fast and painful. This electric surge sent him to the ground, and Emma quickly ran inside to call their parents. As Victor's eyes closed, he reopened them in the hospital, back in the real world, surrounded by doctors using paddle electrodes to revive him. And it worked because his eyes was now open. Victor was so weak and confused, he didn't even speak. But he saw his parents at the door. His mom, Rebecca, was crying. And this time, while in the real world, he actually remembered his dream, or the parallel world he had been living in, and he wondered how he got to the hospital. What actually happened was that when Rebecca put him to sleep the other night, she actually stayed with him on the bed, and later in the morning she discovered that he was hardly breathing. So she and Victor's father, Michael, quickly rushed him to the hospital, where the doctors had no choice but to use the paddles on him. Well, after he opened his eyes, the doctors examined him. Then they let his parents in. He looked at them and smiled. This was the first time in a long time they would all be so close together and be genuinely happy. Shortly after, Victor went back to sleep. Then the doctor pulled his parents aside and whispered, "It's not just a fever. It seems like an infection coupled with fever. We're still running tests, but we're unsure what's causing this." Meanwhile, Victor woke up again in his dream, finding himself on his bed, his sister Emma giggling beside him. His parents were out in the backyard, and, like before, he didn't have his memories. This time, however, things were a little different. As soon as he got out of bed, he walked to his window and looked outside. There was a loud, thunderous sound, and the sky immediately turned purple. When his parents saw this, they quickly dashed into the house. They grabbed him and Emma and ran into their basement to hide. Victor was super confused and tried to ask what in the name of God was happening, but they whispered to him to shush, warning him that the memory man was coming. The basement was silent, and even Emma was quiet. Victor realized this was probably a normal occurrence, but he didn't understand what was happening. After about 30 minutes of complete silence, Michael stood up. He went to check the basement window and saw that the sky had returned to normal. He quickly organized his family and took them to his car. He and Rebecca planned to drive to his sister's place and from there skip town. Michael felt his home wasn't safe enough, and as they drove, Victor and Emma sat in the back. Victor had a million questions buzzing through his mind, but he didn't ask, waiting for everything to stabilize first. In the car radio, a news report warned people to beware of the memory man, who had caused over 700 people to disappear mysteriously in the past week. After Victor heard this, he turned to his sister and asked, "Who's the memory man?" Emma replied, "He's here because of you." Victor was stunned, thinking, "What?" Then she said something very weird. She said, "When the time comes, you should go with the pain." Victor laughed, thinking she was joking, and Emma also laughed with him. Then they arrived at his aunt's house, and as they got out of the car, another lightning noise sounded again, and the sky immediately turned purple. People started running all over. Then a dark figure in a black cloak appeared out of nowhere. He started touching people, and as he did, they disappeared into thin air. He could do this because his presence somehow caused time to slow down, making people move very slowly. Michael grabbed Rebecca and Emma, shouting to Victor to run. Luckily, Victor's aunt's door was open, and he got into the house first. Then Michael fell to the ground with Emma in his hand. Rebecca tried going back for them, but the memory man was already there, and he touched Michael and Rebecca, and they vanished immediately. Then he proceeded to touch Emma. Victor was by the window, and he, seeing everything that had just happened, tried to run back outside, but as he opened the door, he didn't see anybody, because the memory man had made his whole family disappear. Then Victor gave out a loud cry, because he instantly knew he would never see his sister again. That was when he remembered that he had actually seen this memory man before, and that he saw him at the desert where all this madness had begun. And because the feeling of losing his sister felt very familiar, that's what made him remember everything. And he immediately knew that he was dreaming, and that this couldn't be real. Just a few moments after the purple sky cleared and returned to normal, Victor was still in shock. Both his parents and his little sister were gone, and he felt very sad, as he had just lost his sister again. It seemed his aunt wasn't at home, because he didn't see anyone inside. Victor was very sad, but because he knew none of this were actually real, he decided to take action. But he was overwhelmed, as he couldn't understand how he could be dreaming, yet everything seemed so real. As he was lost in thought, a bright light appeared just a few meters away from him. It was hovering above a nearby pond. The light emitted a brilliant array of colors, which made it look like a portal. Victor thought to himself, "This is it. This must be my way out of here." The light was so pleasing to look at that Victor started walking into the pool, his eyes fixed on it, and he completely forgot that he couldn't actually swim. So in less than 3 seconds, he was already sinking, and he lost consciousness, only for him reawaken just near the pond. But by then, the light had disappeared, and as he sat there, all soaked up, he wondered what would happen if the memory man were to catch up to him. After this thought, he realized he needed to wake up as soon as possible, but he couldn't ignore the fact that he might have just lost his only chance. However, because he had seen too many movies, Victor thought that maybe if he could find a clue or a loophole, he would be able to make the light appear again and hopefully leave this dream. Then, he had a brilliant idea to go back to the desert where everything started. Victor took his bicycle from his father's car booth and started heading down the street. As he cycled, he noticed how deserted everywhere looked, due to the memory man causing many people to leave the town, with others still evacuating at that moment. Although there were some passerbys, the street still looked empty. As he cycled, Victor noticed a shop that was open, which surprised him, as it was the first shop he saw that wasn't closed. It was a fruit shop by the corner of the street, and strangely, it was in the same location as his mom's fruit shop in real life. Victor stopped riding and had a weird feeling that maybe his mum would be in the shop, which wasn't possible since the memory man had taken her with his entire family. Nevertheless, Victor quickly drove to the shop and looked inside. He saw an old woman arranging fruits by her table, and she reminded him of his grandma because of the green apron she wore. Back in the real world, Victor loved his grandma very much, as she always took care of him whenever he was sick. He remembered how she would pat him on the head, and she would say, "Pain is weakness leaving the body." As Victor was lost in thought, the old woman noticed him looking at her. She smiled and gave him an apple. Victor took the apple and started eating, as he was exhausted. He found it weird that he could even eat in a dream. But then she looked at him and smiled, and she said, "Remember to always go with the pain." Victor was busy eating the apple, so he only nodded, even though he didn't understand what she meant. Immediately, a loud, thunderous noise sounded, and the sky turned purple. While the few people on the street were busy running for their lives, the old woman just sat in her shop, smiling. Victor's heart started beating fast, as he knew what was about to happen. He quickly ran into the shop and hid behind a fruit tray. Then, a dark figure in a black cloak approached the shop, and Victor wanted to run, but it was even harder to move than the last time he encountered the memory man. And as he walked into the shop, a bright light appeared just a few meters away from the shop. Victor thought, "Yes, this is it." He started moving towards the light, feeling happy, and also feeling a sense of dread because the memory man could still touch him. As he crawled slowly towards it, he randomly thought of his sister Emma and remembered the weird thing she told him when he asked her about the memory man. She said, "When the time comes, go with the pain." Victor then remembered what the old woman had just told him, which was basically the same thing. When he turned his back, the memory man had just touched this old woman, and she disappeared right before Victor's eyes. Seeing this, all Victor felt was extreme pain and serious anger towards this figure. He was in so much pain because the memory man had previously taken his entire family and had still taken this woman again, and at that moment all he wanted was to go through the portal. He wanted to be away from this dark figure so badly, but the more he thought about what his sister had told him, also with what this old woman just said to him, and also what his grandma used to tell him, that pain was weakness leaving the body. He didn't need to be a genius to figure out that this was the loophole he was looking for, that he would need to face this figure, and he had to go towards his pain, and that this is exactly what he had to do if he truly wanted to wake up. Immediately he realized this, he was able to stand up, and he walked easily towards the memory man. A part of him still wasn't in approval with his decision, and this made him very scared, but immediately he touched the black cloak. He instantly woke up in the hospital. He was back in the real world. Victor was so happy. The doctors were amazed because it seemed they had finally found out what was wrong with him, and he was finally stabilized by the doctors. His parents were beside him, and they were all teared up. There was this warmth of joy in the atmosphere. They were all so happy, and this would continue for a long time. Their family returned back to a loving state. This story was made to show people that a lot of the time, the escape you are looking for is only through the route you don't want to take, and that if life is hard, it's because it's trying to teach you something. And most of the time, it's basically just teaching you to overcome your worst fear. Thanks for watching. Until our next story, bye for now.